Today, on a very special episode of Cosmic Road, we are joined by Christopher Noel. So, get in here. It's going to be a great show. Christopher is an author and researcher. I don't know if you describe yourself as an experiencer or not, although I know you've seen some stuff. But welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you so much, Jack. I'm one of your 10,000 addicted subscribers.
Like I know you went to a seance when you were, exploring consciousness and the spiritual stuff, and psi abilities and stuff, and you went to a seance and you saw some stuff. So I consider you an experiencer in that respect.
Very
And
limited, a very limited experiencer compared to most of the folks who are called experiencers. Back when I was 17, I had a very life-changing ghost conversation. For a number of months. I had a friend who lived up the hill from me, who was a woman 14 years older than me, and she was my writing teacher in high school, and we became friends. And she told me that there were strange things going on in her house, like her husband would see a little ball of light come down over their bed at night when my friend Catherine was sleeping, and hover over her head and then kind of dissipate. And she said they saw a pillar of light in the corner of the room in the old part of the house. And so I said, well, let's try to contact it, And luckily, she was game. And so for the next 3.5 months, we conducted a conversation through both Ouija board and automatic writing with this agent, this conscious agent, who told us all this stuff about why he was sort of chained to the earthly plane. He had apparently killed his daughter, and he wanted us to somehow expiate that guilt. And he said, like, he buried her down at the bottom of the field underneath this elm tree that was still there, and there was a spring at the bottom, of the water spring, and he said he buried her there in the fount at the fount of hell. He was quite poetic, and he said he wanted us to go down and gather our harvest of bones, and somehow through this means to restore this daughter, to kind of reverse the sin that he had um, you know, committed, and help him to move on. He said that when he died, I said, what was it like when you first died? And he said, white, so white I was afraid. And then he said, dove toward sea of blue wonder. And then he said, held in massive hands, made to feel I should die again. And then when I went off to college, I didn't know what that meant. When I went off to college, I read St. Augustine, and he talks about the second death, where you die physically, and then if you're sinful, you die further to the possibility of transcending to heaven. So it fit in retrospect. And sometimes he would say he wanted Catherine and I to love each other and bear her again, bear the daughter again. And so, we were like, we don't like each other that way.
a murderous ghost trying to play matchmaker. Great, great.
That's what it was. So anyway, and I had some physical experiences then too. One time I
well,
was
hang on.
going on
I have to. I can't let you get off that easy. Did you dig up the bones?
No, we never did. We were too spooked. We were chickens.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
were yeller. We were yeller. And so, but one time I was going on vacation, a family vacation that summer, and so I said to him, "Well, I'm going on vacation, John. I'll see you in a couple of weeks." And then I left that room, and then I went back to get a pencil that I had left there. And as I turned to leave again, I felt what I interpret as a hand, but definitely something in the back of my head, on my hair. It felt kind of like half normal density and half not, just kind of like half dense. And it caressed the back of my head. Um, Sometimes you'd be sitting in there, and it would suddenly get really cold in the room, which is common. And we would say on the Ouija board, we'd say, why is it cold? He said, X is here. It will not let me talk. X is strong today. So whatever that is. And then most impressively, we would sit there, and sometimes nothing would happen. And then we would get the sense, because he would have to sort of manifest outside the wall of the house. And we would suddenly hear this ringing bell. And that meant he was there and ready to communicate. And there is no bell in our reality. But we had a cassette recorder going so that we could just say the letters, because the planchette would move so fast we couldn't keep up. We couldn't write it down, so we would say the letters and transcribe it later off the cassette recorder, and you can hear the bell on the cassette recorder on the recording. So this was my introduction to the physical phenomena that can occur from some invisible agency. And for the rest of my life, this was 45 years ago, 46 years ago. And ever since then, I've known that there's this larger reality frame out there. And though I've never had another ghost experience, that has sort of established my worldview, and it's made existing more magical, and more sort of a sense of abundance and pregnancy just outside the known, familiar reality. I realized I should come full circle and start to investigate more about how it is that spirits can exist and can affect the physical world. I wrote a book called "There Is No Veil" because I think that the veil is a subjective construct. I don't think it's an objective and necessary barrier, because we all know of people who from childhood can see spirits all around them. I think it's a state of mind, a mirage that we impose upon ourselves, partly because everybody's not gifted enough to have the vision to see what's actually right around us, and partly because, forgetting the spirit side and the home that we go back to when we die is part of the deal, having an earth life. We want to have an authentic adventure here, and knowing too much about the fact that we're just heartbeat away from joining this other, more transcendent realm, wouldn't help us to be grounded in this world. So I think that's part of it, is the veil of forgetfulness that seems to be a natural part of existing here. So I wrote that book, and then on the strength of that, I got invited to a seance in Western New York, not far from Hydesville, where the spiritualist movement began in 1848. And in this seance, which was led by an internationally known, I was really lucky to have it so close by. It was 9 hours driving, but so privileged, because they're usually overseas someplace, these sort of elite level physical mediumship seances. And by physical, I mean, stuff happens, phenomena occur that can be documented, like levitations and voices speaking from the midair, from just the air. And so this guy is named Gary Mannion, and he's a British physical medium, who's been healing people and doing mediumship ever since he was 14 years old. Now he's 35. He's just really fully developed and goes all over the world. Anyway, I was in this seance, and the things that happened in there were, I saw this in very low lighting. He's been doing it long enough that now it doesn't have to be pitch dark, which is usually the case in the developmental phase of a physical mediumship evolution, because the subtle energies that are involved in manifestations from the spirit world are overwhelmed and disrupted by the electromagnetic wavelengths that we are used to. And of course, it gives skeptics plenty of ammunition. They go, "Oh, how convenient! It all takes place in the dark." But once you've developed over years and years, sometimes decades, you can then introduce light into the enterprise, and things can happen that people can see. So we saw a woman's chair being pushed by no visible means across the floor, and then pulled back to where she had been sitting. We saw a seance trumpet, which are these tin, like megaphone shaped objects that sometimes spirits speak through, because it simply amplifies their sometimes very subtle voice. We saw two of them levitate toward the ceiling and then stay up there. And incidentally, Leslie Keene, who's big in, who's an investigative journalist who's been very pivotal in the promulgating of information about the UFO, UAP phenomenon. She also wrote a book called Surviving Death, which is an excellent book that I recommend highly. Just a handful of really persuasive, rigorously researched and documented works out there that I recommend this highly, to convince you of the reality of our spirit nature in the afterlife.
When you can sit in a room and watch objects levitate before your eyes, which I've done many times, there's got to be a physics, there's got to be a scientific explanation of what is going on to make that happen.
It's not due to any of the forces that we know from the physics that we've been able to develop over the last 400 years. It's just not. there must be a whole other kind of matter and energy that's responsible for this, and it's got to be the matter and energy that the spiritual reality partakes of, and that allows them to have agency upon our familiar world. So in this seance, not only did I see this levitation in very low light, but a hand not connected to an arm and a body, handed me this aport. An aport, an aport means any object that, aport from the French meaning to bring, and it means in seance context, it means an object that appears out of thin air, out of apparently nowhere. And I got this little, like a rock. Oh, that's good. It might be a crystal or a gem if I were to, put it in a tumbler. So far, I haven't done that. So all I know is it's a nondescript little rock. But the spirit hand gave it to me, and it came out of nowhere, because we fully examined the room before the seance, and there were a lot of people got coins and little rocks.
So what did the hand look like? Was it just like your own?
It felt
was
a
it
little
male hand. Was it?
It was a small male hand, and I was skeptical because the medium too was small male. But two things. His hands were securely fastened to the chair with zip ties, and you could, all sorts of magicians have a way of like working with that. But another guy in the seance went up to have his turn at the spirit hand, and he burst into tears, and later asked him why, and he said, the first hand was a small woman's hand, and he felt that it was his mother's hand, and you could feel anything. It's not persuasive. But then he had big hands, not at all like the medium's hands. Big hand, one hand, but she knew it was his father's hand, because forget what it was. There was some trait of the hand that he knew, and so both his parents are dead, and so he convinced that this was first his mother's hand and then his father's hand, and they were very different sizes. So it wasn't the medium doing it.
Could you see the hands?
Very dimly, you can see it.
Were they like see-through? Were they like translucent? Or
they were not. They were solid, which is exactly what Leslie Keane described. She sits in a seance led by the British medium Stuart Alexander, who has been doing this for 40 years, and he's one of the most exhaustively studied and never remotely debunked practitioners of this sort of enterprise. And she sees a hand, a sort of a amorphous substance coming from the medium across a table. She describes this in her book and in interviews. Leslie Keane is an impeccable source. Her brain, her mind is extremely even-handed and neutral and objective and skeptical in just the right way, not cynical, but skeptical. And she describes this happening. She describes seeing levitation just like I saw. The video cuts in after a long session leading up to it, where they're interacting with a spirit energy, and they're saying, you can lift, and then the table lifts up underneath their hand. And this is on the porch of the very same house where I was lucky enough to attend that seance. So I know that it's not a house of trickery, and it's underneath the open sky. So there's no like fishing line, on top of the table. It's on the front porch outside in full light. So it's a rare success in levitation that they captured on video that day.
So what do you think ghosts are formed of?
They partake of a kind of matter that's not the kind of matter that we know. And in my book, I hypothesize that this matter may be what we call dark matter. That most scientists now, the consensus is, and has been for the last 30 or 40 years, that dark matter is a necessary piece of the puzzle, that there's 85% of the matter that exists is unknown so far, except for its gravitational effect upon galaxies and galaxy clusters. Like just briefly, galaxies spin faster and more coherently than they ought to, just based on the the gravitational effect of the mass of what we can see and detect. So there must be a whole lot more matter that we can't see and can't detect yet, except for its gravitational effect upon these galaxies. And so, as we know from Einstein, matter and energy are interchangeable. They're two sides of the same coin. So there's this kind of matter and energy that is 85% of reality that we don't know. And it suffuses galaxies, it suffuses solar systems. And so I think that since we, over all this time of parapsychology, have not been able to even scratch the surface of explaining such things as levitation and telepathy, remote viewing, I think that this other, I call it invisible matter versus ordinary matter. This invisible matter is the only potential candidate for explaining how this stuff happens that we can't otherwise. We have not the foggiest notion of how to explain it within the theoretical framework that we are familiar with. It's got to be something like that. I don't think that spirit can be made of nothing. It's got to be something, some substance. And the characteristics of dark matter fit the bill in that it's there, but we can't detect it with our instruments, because the instruments have all been designed and built and calibrated according to ordinary matter, not according to this other kind of matter. And so I think that it's at least a possibility, and I try to discuss this in my book, UAPs and the Afterlife, that, for instance, in the case of levitation, people feel that the table is floating. It's not like jerked up by some energy from below or pulled up. It's buoyant. So I feel like these two kinds of matter have a certain default ratio most of the time. But when something spiritual is happening, a spiritual event, a physical manifestation of the intervention of spirit, I think the ratio changes. I think the ratio of this very light, I forgot to mention that dark matter is much, much, much less dense than our ordinary matter. We already know that. And that's another reason why it fits the bill of what could be spirit matter, And so I think that a conscious agent, a gifted medium or a spirit who's able to do this can shift the ratio in, say, a table or a trumpet or any number of other things. They can do it with rocks. They can create rocks out of nothing. I think that there's an interplay of this very, very low density invisible matter with the regular density stuff that we're used to, and that the ratio changes. And when, say, a table becomes more suffused with this invisible matter than usual, it can become essentially lighter than air.
Because I've experienced some of this outside of the seance.
Yeah.
I've had an apport, I've had disembodied voices, I've experienced either levitation. There are other things that I have been present.
I didn't know that.
I don't want to get.
Let me step aside for a moment, and why don't you tell us a little bit? Synergy. We got synergy, man. You talk, I'll talk, and together we'll create.
Well, I'll tell about the apport. Okay, I'll tell about the apport.
Yeah,
all right,
more than the sum of our parts.
Yeah. Okay. So this appears in every single video I've ever made. This is the Zeta tag from the car that I'm driving. It was my stepmother's car, and she was a member of the Zeta sorority when she was in school, and when she was an adult, her whole life revolved around the women's group that was an outgrowth of the Zeta sorority. She was the president. She was the treasurer. They restored this mansion in downtown San Antonio. Her whole life was revolved around around the Zetas. So the Zetas are inextricably linked with her. So, she passed a few years ago, and at the time I was still kind of an atheist and, materialist, not non-believer in the spiritual. And but I was starting to get into spirituality because I was starting to do ghost hunting and stuff and have some experiences. And I was like, maybe there's something there. And, but this was one of my earliest experiences. We had remodeled the house. My wife and I had remodeled our house to sell it so that we could come here we're sell our house in Austin to move to College Station. And so we had remodeled this house, new paint on everything, new floors. There's not a stick of anything of ours left in the house. I had inherited this car, my stepmother's car, and I had removed the Zeta tag from it because I'm not a member of the Zetas. And I love the Zetas. We had her service there, and they're great people, and some of them were very helpful. And the aftermath of her passing, and great guys, great ladies. But not a Zeta. So I removed the Zeta tag. I probably threw it away. I have no idea what became of the Zeta tag. But a few months after she passed, maybe 6 months, maybe to a year, we had remodeled the house. Then I was doing the walkthrough afterward, and on this new floor, right near the front door, or not too near, but in the entryway, was sitting right where I couldn't miss it, was the Zeta tag. On
And you recognize it as the same one? I mean,
same
like with
one.
the same amount of wear and tear and not brand new and all that?
Yes, as far as I
Yeah.
can tell, it's the exact same Zeta tag. It even has the part on the back where you see where I had removed it from the car.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
the metal. So, and
Well, I mean, you
there's
didn't put it there. Your wife didn't
I
put it
didn't put it
there.
there. So we had the painting done, before we put the floor on, obviously. So if the painters had found it or something, they would have put it on the kitchen counter or something. They
Right.
wouldn't have put it on the floor. And if they had put it on the floor, if they had found something in a closet somewhere, well, guess what? The floor was no longer there because it was taken up immediately afterwards, and completely replaced. And
And so
so
it was on the replaced floor that this appeared.
something that was
New floor.
inextricably linked to my stepmother Harriet, that I couldn't associate with anything else.
Anybody else? She made sure that it wasn't ambiguous at all.
Not at all. Not at
Wow.
all.
That's
And
amazing, Jack. I love that. Well, that's the thing. They can take things that were once somewhere else and move them to where they want them to be. And I feel that, at least within my hypothesis, it could be that they suffuse it with this invisible matter. It becomes invisible. It becomes, the ratio becomes such that it's more invisible matter than regular matter. And then they can transport it to where they want it, middle of your floor. Um, and and so and This is all to say, and thank you for sharing that. This is all to say that what I experienced and what thousands and thousands of other people have experienced since 1848, 1850, when things really got going with seances in this country and the UK and then throughout Europe, for the last, still going on. People think that spiritualism died away. Well, I'm in a spiritualist circle via Zoom that's taking place in England right now, that's been going for 10 years, and they have spirits coming through and telling people about things that only the person knows. So it's still happening. It's just more underground because of the oppressively materialistic, mindset that we're in, and therefore the ridicule that folks want to avoid by staying private. But it's still happening. So for 175 years, this has been going on, and people have been experiencing these things in seances and outside of seances, like you did. Well, I think it's a microcosm of what we're seeing with the UAP phenomena. Contactees describe the Greys, for instance, as not being bound by gravity. They sometimes float around. Well, we don't say, well, what's their propulsion system? Similarly, I don't think we should say what's their propulsion system, even about the craft. Physicists and interested scientists and thinkers are pulling their hair out for decades and decades trying to figure out, like Bob Lazar, et cetera, what it is that technology can bring to bear to allow for the transcendence of gravity. Well, why does there have to be some technology? I think spirit, which is psychic potential, psychic phenomena, can create all the same manifestations that we see in the UAP field. And I know that that would get pushback if any of the prominent scientists say it, because, again, of the materialism that we are suffering under. But I have an idea that there's a small m materialism, which is just using our ordinary framework, and that's not up to the task of explaining how levitation occurs, or how spaceships, how UAPs can go from 0 to 2,000 miles an hour like that. It's not up to explaining that. And there's the capital M materialism that embraces both ordinary matter and this other kind of matter that we know is there in great abundance, but that we don't know anything about. So it's the best candidate, pending any other candidates that may come along. It's the best one to explain in a sort of holistic way how the ratio of kinds of matter can explain these events, these episodes that otherwise have zero explanation within our small m materialism. So I think that the propulsion hounds out there, like Jack Sarfati and many others, are barking up the wrong tree. They're barking up the small m materialist tree, not the wider materialism, the broader encompassing materialism that needs to be put on the table if we're ever to unpack the real mystery at play here.
So ghosts are made of dark matter. You heard it here first. You heard it here, guys. Chris has an awesome new theory. So getting back to the UFOs, and you say basically don't worry about what the propulsion is because it's more esoteric than we could ever imagine.
It's easy to imagine once you bring into the picture these two kinds of matter. And I call it my matter type ratio theory. There are two matter types we know already, and that's already known. We don't have to reach for unknown imaginary explanations. We know that there's two matter types, and if you stipulate that, then we can understand quite readily, I think, how changing the ratios of them and having conscious agents be in charge through intent, conscious intent, just like we can. Gifted people can do telekinesis, psychokinesis through intent. I think intent drives everything. You can do remote viewing through intent. You can do telepathy through intent, clairvoyance and precognition and all the good stuff through conscious intent. I think that's the engine at the root of all these phenomena. And if you have a huge population of these aliens, if you have a huge population of them, say the Greys, and they're operating as a hive mind, it seems plausible that they can effect changes in our physical world that are radical as saucers and cylinders and triangles moving through the air. I mean, it's really a difference in degree, not a difference in kind, from a levitation inside of a seance. I think the seances are a microcosm of what we're witnessing on the macro scale when it comes to all spiritual phenomena, including, and I include that, with aliens and their machinery. I think that we're just underestimating the power of spirit when we turn to mechanistic explanations or we seek mechanistic the paradigm of mechanism and small m materialism. I think that we're just underestimating what spirit can do, because 99.9% of people who are thinking about this who have never this range of issues has never sat in a seance and seen what is possible without technology.
Well, I've heard Peter Maxwell Slattery, and I'm going to interview him next week, by the way. He said that of all the UFO activity that we see in the sky, like 90% of it is other dimensional. There's only like the bottom 10% that's like nuts and bolts UFOs. But but there do seem to be nuts and bolts UFOs, and people like Michael Herrera and others will talk about how we've been able to reverse engineer, or maybe we were gifted some technology, but we've been able to get some stuff to work, and we have our own UFOs. What do you say to people like that who say we've got our own UFOs, so thus there must be some propulsion that we can understand somehow?
But remember what Michael Herrera has also told us, shared with us, is that there's this program, the P3 program, where they pluck gifted folks, psychically gifted folks, out of populations, Native Americans, developing countries. They find them somehow, blood tests, I don't know, and they abscond with them to these centers where they give them and their families, take their families too, and they give them a great life. And they sort of suck the psychic juices out of them in order to make an interface with the craft and the visitors, the aliens. And without that, I mean, they wouldn't go to this extent, this elaborate program, if it weren't necessary, if the psychic spiritual part of the equation weren't indispensable. So I think that only reinforces the idea that it's not a mechanistic technological avenue that we need to go down. It's the interface between mind and matter, and I think that mind is this spirit stuff I'm talking about, whether it's dark matter or some other similar kind of stuff that we don't yet understand, but that interacts with our world.
And I've been in to several CE5 events where people were having these experiences, but they weren't like nuts and bolts, UFOs and beings like flesh and blood beings they were experiencing. They were out of body experiences, and they were seeing beings of light and stuff like that. And it was a more mystical experience than I would have thought, going into it.
I think that the central concept is density. They aren't necessarily nuts and bolts, but I think they can increase their density. And when there's a visitation of a craft on Earth, its ratio of ordinary matter to this rarefied matter is increased enough that it becomes dense, and that's why they don't stay long. I don't think they can abide the dense mode for very long, and then that's why they go back up there. I think they change their density, and when they get down low, they're nuts and bolts, and of course, or smooth and animal skin like. And the ones we make, where we're trying to replicate that, they're nuts and bolts because we don't know how to manifest matter with our mind, so we build these things. And then Michael Herrera's P3 program would explain that we pluck these people out who are psychically gifted, and that allows us to animate these ships that we build with the help of aliens, not just by ourselves, because we're not strong enough, we're not powerful enough. And it may be that the hive mind of the aliens is overwhelmingly more influential in manipulating our ordinary reality here than any one of us who has psychic gifts. I think they're employing the brain trust, or the mind trust, or spirit trust to affect this remarkable levitation that these ships can achieve. When a contactee sees these grays floating through the room, they get their arms get taken by the hands of these grays, and then they are floating. I think they too are buoyant, like this table, like any object that levitates. I think they become infused with this rarefied kind of matter, energy matters, same thing. And they can then go right through the window, right through the roof of the car, roof of their house. That's what they describe. And in John Mack's book, Passport to the Cosmos, he has many testimonials where people say that it feels like their cells are separating. It feels like they're becoming like air or like light when they're in the company of these abductors, and then their density decreases enough so they can pass right through ordinary matter. That's because they're suffused then with a higher ratio of this non-ordinary invisible matter. Why I don't think these aliens are from Alpha Centauri or the Pleiades or anywhere far away. I think that all roots up from the life as it has developed on Earth. I think that this consciousness that has incarnated now in a variety of forms and now flies around in objects, levitating, has been using our zoology. I think we need look no further than the Earth for this. So I'm working that out in a new book. But anyway, one final point before we move on to further final points is if these craft, if these ships were using ordinary kinds of energy, they would all be hot on thermal. But the shocking thing is that many, if not most of them, are cold on thermal. That movie that I think you've referred to, A Tear in the Sky, features a guy who tracks some of these triangles and other shapes way high in the stratosphere and on thermal. And you can see right on the screen in that documentary, it says like 80 degrees below zero. If these ships obeyed the first law of thermodynamics, which is conservation of energy, it would dump out a whole shitload of heat in accomplishing what they do. They're just using so much energy.
Probably the best example of a high acceleration is the case from Kevin Day on the USS Princeton, monitoring when they first discovered these tic-tac shaped objects in the Nimitz encounter in 2004. He observed them basically cruising along at an altitude of 28,000 feet, moving at about 100 knots horizontal velocity. And they would then sometimes drop down to the sea surface or 50 feet above the sea in 0.78 seconds was the measured drop time. The most probable acceleration is over 5,000 Gs. So you're looking at least 5,000 times the acceleration of gravity to accelerate to the midpoint and then decelerate to the stopping point. That's a crazy amount of kinetic energy, and it just doesn't disappear when the object stops. We lowballed this to estimating its mass to only be 1,000 kilograms. So at 1,000 kilograms, the amount of energy that it had to deposit was on the order of 4 times 10 to the 11th joules. That's basically 100 tons of TNT, and would be the same as about 250 Tomahawk cruise missiles going off at once. And that's what should have happened when this thing stopped. And of course, none of that's observed, and which is shocking. So what's happening with the energy? Where does the energy go? You don't see heat signatures in the infrared, so we don't have any idea. This energy does not seem to be being dissipated in any way.
And that's because it's not using any technology that obeys our laws of thermodynamics. I think the reason it's cold is related to the reason that in haunted houses we have these cold spots, like I and my friend Catherine felt in that room with our Ouija board and our automatic writing. It would suddenly get cold. I think that the other kind of matter, this invisible matter, is so rarefied that when its ratio increases within our frame of reference, it spaces out the molecules, and just like at the top of a mountain, you get colder. I think that this low density level is just intrinsically colder. So many cases of seances back in the history that I've been reading, it's fascinating history of spiritualism, and when things are starting to get funky and things are going to happen, and you're going to have spiritual manifestations, voices and hands on your face, and it sometimes it's not just gets cold. You can feel a wind of cold coming through, like a it's called psychic wind. There's actually a category for it. You feel this coming through, and I think that's the low density kind of matter that we don't have instruments for, surging in, inspiriting a room or a space. The reason that these high flying UFOs, UAPs are cold is similar. I think their ratio of this low density matter is such that they don't obey our laws of energy and heat. They're wispy and vaporous, though they might be visible way up there. And then if they come down, they get solid. So you can throw a rock at them and they clang and you can be taken aboard them, but they don't hang around. And I don't think they go all the way up to what we consider heaven. I think that because people don't describe being abducted and then taken up, anything that looks like near-death experiences in the sense of gorgeous vistas and a sense of being home. Some of them say it feels like going home, but I think that's just because they're in that direction. But I don't think they go all the way there, because we don't get taken to heaven. We get taken to some austere way station, some tank-like or like a clinical room where all this hideous stuff is done to us. That's not heaven. I don't think they can go to heaven. I think they can't ground themselves fully on the earth, and for some reason, therefore, they can't get all the way up. I think that their bandwidth is simply narrower than ours, and I think that's why they have been taking us and taking our genetic material and trying to merge with us, hybridize with us, in order to co-opt or gather for themselves some of what they're lacking that we have, which is this wide sweep of spiritual elasticity or spiritual range that they don't have. I don't know why. I don't know where that comes from, but that's kind of where I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, no, I love that. Examining, the question why so many alien abductees and contactees have the beings seemingly interested in their souls and playing with their consciousness and stuff like that. And your idea that they don't have access, we may be limited in this body, but we have access to our higher selves or whatever in that other place. And they may not have access to that other place.
Yeah.
And that is
I think we go back. I think we go up and up and up and up. I think we eventually can get back to source when we evolve enough, spiritually, morally, intellectually, whatever it is, whatever label you want to put on it. When we evolve as a individual, we then eventually get up to the source of love and light, and all that's good, to ecstasy. And I think if they could do that, they would go there. And if they could be here, they'd be here. I think why else would they be boomeranging back and forth between, across the visibility threshold, across the density threshold, perpetually throughout history, up and down, but never staying here, never staying there. Why do that? And why try to grab us and poke around and grope? It's like they're groping for that essential spark that'll give them what they want in order to go home, perhaps.
Okay, well, okay, we've got it. If there are any hybrids watching, I am very curious. Did
Yeah.
it work? Did hybridizing with humans give you access to those higher dimensions? Okay. Changing gears a little bit. Changing gears. I know you've done a lot of work on Bigfoot. What tell us about Bigfoot?
Well, I think that Bigfoot. I used to scoff at people who said anything like this. I used to think that they were simply a this world evolutionary product, another primate like ourselves. That Sasquatch, unlike any other mammal, can produce light from its eyes. A lot of people are going to be switching the channel at this point, but I have many testimonials from people who are absolutely 100% positive there was no ambient light, so that it wasn't reflection. I have my friend Jeff, who was out, and it was a rainstorm, and they really wanted to go back home. It's a guy who was taking them out, said, no, just a little bit farther, we'll get to where they usually hang out. And they go down a little bit more, and it's raining, and it's utterly pitch dark. They have flashlights, of course, but then they get to the start and they hear a growl, and they turn off the flashlights, and there's a whole set of glowing eyes, and they can see them blinking. And Jeff saw one turn to another individual next to it, and you can see the other individual's face suddenly became illuminated by the light from the eyes. So nothing else does that. But what does that? People say that the aliens sometimes have glowing eyes. I think that Sasquatch, and also Sasquatch can profoundly affect electronics. People's batteries will be drained, just like with aliens. People's batteries will be drained. I had this happen myself with a thermal camera when I was trying to get footage of this juvenile who was climbing an apple tree near me. I had my thermal camera on, and it suddenly was blocked by this black kind of shape that looked like a black fabric that was being hung over the lens. It just block, and I turned it off, and it's worked fine ever since. It worked fine always before that. But they can affect not only machinery, but they can what's called zap people. People are frequently, Sasquatch researchers will be out in the field and they'll hear wood knocks, and then people will suddenly be hit by this pulse of electricity. Some people think it's infrasound, but infrasound doesn't disable electronics. So I think it's electromagnetic waves of energy. People become nauseated. They'll get down on their knees and feel like they want to throw up. They'll actually throw up. They'll be dizzy. They'll be disoriented. They get lost in forests that they've been to 100 times before and never been lost before. So Sasquatch, at least those two things, in addition to all sorts of paranormal manifestations that seem to associate themselves with Sasquatch that I could get into if this were a 3-hour show, seem to indicate to me that they're more in the camp of poltergeists and aliens and spirits, but they're also flesh and blood. I think that, and I wrote a whole book called Mind Speak about telepathy between Sasquatch and people. They're much more adept than we are at all things psychic. Telepathy, I don't know about remote viewing because I haven't asked them about that, but I bet you they can. I think they operate in a hive mind. That's how come they're so coordinated as a group, and that's how come it's so damn hard to ever get close to them, because they communicate and they coordinate. Wherever you are, they're at least 150 feet away, except this one time I got lucky by the apple tree, which is in a documentary I have out called How to See a Sasquatch, if anyone's interested. So I think that there are flesh and blood Sasquatch, but then there are dead Sasquatch who are more proficient at manifesting, like our own species ghosts can manifest. It's very rare. I think they manifest more commonly, which is why people see them disappearing and appearing. Lots of people say that, but I don't think the living flesh and blood ones can disappear. That's just a bridge too far for me. But I think that they can. The ones who have experienced physical death can then hang out with their kin and companions more readily here on this plane than we can with ours once we die. I think they're more conversant with the transition, just like aliens are, back and forth from low density to high density. I think it's a consciousness that incarnates in us, and I think it's a consciousness, whatever that is, a conscious agent that incarnates in the whole array of species or types of aliens, including Sasquatch, because these aren't aliens. They're our own zoology that is being capitalized upon by this consciousness that is trying to replicate itself, trying to diversify itself here on our planet.
Is this an off-world consciousness? Are we talking alien? Are we talking?
I don't think consciousness has a specific spot. I think that's why if I were a remote viewer, I could see a book in China and tell you what it says on the spine. And I don't think consciousness is it's non-local. I don't think that the consciousness that is that engenders the physical forms of aliens and UAPs that we encounter. I don't think that it's located anywhere. It's from everywhere and nowhere. Is my sense of it. So I think all the attempts to pinpoint, origins in our ordinary physical space are misguided. I think it's not in ordinary space. I think it's in the space of this other kind of matter, invisible matter, that probably has its own planets. People say that they're taken to other planets. I think it might be that these aren't the literal planets that we have in mind. I think they're literal, but they're in another kind of matter. Anyway, that's getting to
no, sure. I mean, I research other dimensions and densities, and the idea that there are planets and whole realities that exist at other vibration levels or densities or dimensions or whatever.
I think of it as vibration levels rather than dimensions. I kind of, the reason I wrote the book called "There Is No Veil" is I kind of shy away from this notion of otherness in terms of an other place. I think it's a smooth transition of frequencies. Because when like ghosts come and go, they often manifest and densify gradually, and then they gradually fade away. I think it's a smooth transition. I don't think there's any, barrier, objective barrier. I think that our ability to perceive them is limited, so that's the only barrier. But I don't think it exists in reality.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this right. So I think your theory is that is it other dimensional, higher dimensional beings are tinkering with the genes here on Earth and creating a diversity of life forms, which would make sense in a major way, because so many of these aliens or quote unquote aliens that we see are something that we're familiar with. Mantis beings or cat people or whatever, because I mean,
exactly. That's why
it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So is that kind of your idea?
Yeah,
Am I saying that right?
I don't know if it's unclear to me whether if this whole idea is right, whether it's that they're tinkering with on the level of the DNA, microscopically, or if they're just bringing these different creatures together and making them love each other to create these hybrids. There's a common misperception that hybridization outside of species is impossible, but it's not. There's lots of examples in birds and in even in mammals, like a lion and a tiger. They're different species, and they create the liger, which is larger, more robust than either of the parents. And there's this geneticist named Eugene McCarthy, who has this website called macroevolution.com, where he goes into hybridization. He wrote the definitive book on hybridization in birds, published by no less than Oxford University Press. So he's no slouch when it comes to the theory of hybridization, and he puts out there that there's all sorts of possibilities, even outside of the family, not just species to species, but family to family, and results in hybridization. It has all these examples. So I think that it might be that just as when they take an abductee on board and they use these very primitive methods, like making a man ejaculate or going into a woman's ovaries, that's right, ovaries, to get eggs, that's a very gross anatomy kind of approach. They're not, you'd think they could get the DNA through some, more subtle means, but apparently not. So maybe when they're hybridizing, they just get these animals and they put them together like a bonobo and what are some other DNA that they found in these Nazca mummies? Human and bonobo, perhaps, or some reptile,
maybe insectile. Who knows?
Human.
But probably more reptilian.
Because if they've been hybridizing, if I'm right, and they've been hybridizing and messing around and experimenting in the laboratory Earth since 400,000 years ago, at least, when the insects arose and began to take over the earth. And insects, incidentally, were huge back then. Once they developed, they were huge. And so they've probably been hybridizing insects. And then once reptiles came along, they began mixing that into the brew. And for whatever, in order to, I guess, the idea would be this consciousness wanted to become dense, become a living, breathing creature. Well, I don't know why. I guess maybe actually an Inca creation stories, one of the strands of the creation story is very complicated. But one of them says that this god, due to cosmic loneliness, began creating different things on Earth. I think the consciousness that makes us is making us to grow and learn and expand itself and diversify itself. And I think that the same thing is true of whatever the consciousness is that's creating this whole other class of beings. It wants to instantiate or substantiate itself, concretize itself, have a life in a dense in a denser life, not just this ethereal kind of life. And that's what it's been trying to do all this time. But apparently it can't do it enough to just live on Earth, unless you believe that they live underground. I think they default to this higher frequency, and they can't be grounded.
There's a reason you don't see otherworldly beings just walking down the street. I mean, there's something
they appear from a low density state to a high density state. We see them, and they go back to the low density state. It's a temporary thing, a fleeting thing. Yeah, that's the reason you don't. Except very special
do you think
people.
There are aliens from other planets that come to visit, or is it all other dimensional? Or
I don't know. It's way above my pay grade, but I lean toward thinking that there's nothing is happening from other planets, because we're not seeing anything that doesn't have a recognizable root in earthly zoology. And so why would these things? People say, "Oh, convergent evolution." So on another planet, they would, how seahorses look like horses, but they're not related to horses. And there are these ways that maximize survival, and that there could be humanoids on other planets. But I don't buy that. I think the very fact that we can recognize in all aliens, we can recognize earthly life forms or permutations of earthly life forms, points me anyway to thinking that better to exhaust and explore the possibilities, the explanatory possibilities that are inherent in that fact before venturing out into these much more esoteric types of hypotheses that we have no way of testing. We can find out, especially now, thanks to the advent of these Nazca mummies, we can find out concretely how it is that these aliens are built, and whether they're, the very fact that they share DNA with us. That's not going to happen from a foreign planet unless there's the panspermia idea, where everything is seeded by an original genesis, and which is possible, but doesn't really float my boat very much. I think that it's a consciousness on Earth doing all this stuff with earthly raw materials, genetic raw materials, and that the very fact that they can mate with us and produce offspring shows that they are of us. And one way of being of us, deeply kindred to us, so that we can reproduce together, is that the original consciousness that made them worked with the tree of life, the trunk of which and the roots of which all go back to the same genetic information system that we have, and that all of life on Earth has, and that they partake of by creating this whole host of chimeras and hybrids and different versions of what our natural evolution has produced. And they're taking the natural evolution and building a different layer onto it or underneath it or alongside it, according to their own designs, their own goals that we can't fully understand, except that they want to diversify and perhaps attempt to merge with us so that they can, like we were saying before, so they can enjoy a wider spiritual reach or potential that they see in us. They have much stronger psychic abilities, so their consciousness is more focused in that way. But perhaps because of that, or not, they don't have as wide-ranging a consciousness to get up to heaven and to live down here. They're stuck in the middle somewhere. They're alienated. You could say the aliens are alienated from both ends of the spectrum that we can enjoy. And we don't really have access to living in the middle where they live. Something like that. Something like that. I
No,
said that
no,
right.
that makes a lot of sense, Chris. It really does. It really does. Okay, switching gears a little bit. What are you working on now?
It's called Look No Further. Aliens are Earthlings who maximize psychic potential. That's the mouthful of the subtitle there. I just have no track record, no credentials for the UAP field. I just sort of, I'm stumbling in here off the street. I have no business talking about this except for the fact that I have this spiritual background and spiritual research, spiritual investigation research that I've been reading that has shown me that there's another way, another paradigm within which to see the UAP phenomena. And so I just want to contribute that viewpoint to the overall discussion and see if it has any, any legs to it. I just wish that there's this whole pantheon of commentators and leaders in this UAP space, as we say, that are very influential, but none of them has experienced any of this psychokinesis, either in a seance context or outside of a seance context. So they don't bring that to the table. And I think it ought to be.
I totally agree. I love what you're doing. I mean, from my own research and limited experience, it's all connected. Bigfoot's connected to UFOs and poltergeist. UFO, there's poltergeist activity associated with it. And it's also connected to spiritual stuff. It may be largely spiritual, but it's all connected.
The whole hitchhiker effect where somebody experiences one thing and then other things related begin to occur. I think this is because of the concept of resonance. If you have a wine glass, and opera singers and even others can sing at the right note to resonate with the glass, it'll shatter. Some people think that's not true, but it is true. It's because you've gotten your voice to the same frequency as the glass's natural frequency. And why does it shatter instead of just match the glass? It's because when you resonate, you add energy to the system. You add energy. That resonance itself creates its own increased energy. Well, I think that when you experience a ghost, a poltergeist, a UAP visitation, Sasquatch, a gray alien, any kind of alien, I think that it's the only reason you're experiencing it is that your vibrational band or range is overlapping with its vibrational range. It's been able to densify in order to come down to our vibration. Well, when we resonate, i.e. perceive and experience this visitation or this encounter, that adds energy to us, and that energy then makes us more susceptible, it increases our frequency. And when our frequency is raised like that, by having this energy added, then we are more equipped to experience other similar high frequency entities or conscious agents. So I think the hitchhiker effect is just our being permitted to, privileged or cursed with an expanded range of frequency, thanks to the visitation, the initial visitation. And then there's a holdover effect where we continue to have this expanded range of frequency, so that when we go back home, if we are at the Skinwalker Ranch and then we go all the way back home 2,000 miles away, still are experiencing things we never experienced before, because we now we now possess a broader range of frequency of our ability to experience a higher rate of frequency, and then it bleeds over into our family members, so that the person from the ranch who came home and then her son started seeing like a wolf, like a dog man in the backyard, and orbs in the room, and other specters. It's because we now have our frequency capacity is now larger, it's greater, because of the original, the effect or the influence of the original encounter with something of a higher frequency. That makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. And my own experiences, I don't know if they began because I was researching it and my mind was open to it, or because at the same time I was starting to ghost hunt and I was like coming in contact with stuff.
Yeah.
And that
and it was
expanded my frequency.
Pumping you with frequency,
exactly.
more frequency.
Exactly.
That's how it does.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
We figured this out. We
Yeah,
figured this
no,
out. We said
yeah,
that, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, man. Because I've been wondering the same thing myself since that started to happen. And thank you so much for joining me, Chris. This has been a great conversation. I really loved it, and I think the audience got a lot out of it. I hope they did. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, is there a way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, my website is thenearnessofyou.net. And you can get in touch with me through there. I have all my books on there, and Sasquatch research videos, and UAP videos, and various things. So I'd love to be in touch. I'd love to talk, and I appreciate, Jack, the wide ranging atmosphere that you promote here, where we can sort of like,
Hey, I love your research. It's wide ranging research.
we
It's
can
awesome.
drift around, we can meander all we want. Hope to close a couple circles along the way.
Beautiful.
I've studied a guy in Argentina named Ariel Farias. Great thing about Ariel is that he doesn't require darkness. He's a regular guy. Again, like the best psychic subjects, he's not interested in being a psychic guru. He's a regular family man. He's got a good day job. He's just interested in understanding what's going on. He found, to his surprise, that he's able to make tables rise by touching them lightly at the close end of the table. And we've got some very good video of the table rising under Ariel.
When you can sit in a room and watch objects levitate before your eyes, which I've done many times, there's got to be a physics, there's got to be a scientific explanation of what is going on to make that happen. And I wish that more scientists were curious about this. I mean, this is actually happening.
It turns out that these folks are building on a rich tradition, as you can see here, starting with this pen and ink from 1854, 170 years ago, and then this engraving from 1871. The practice, technically called macropsychokinesis, has been well chronicled across the years, a tiny fraction captured on film generations before Photoshop. The common denominator between this phenomenon and UAPs is levitation, an object being lighter than air, flying or floating with no apparent means of propulsion. For nearly 8 decades now, since the mid-1940s, physicists worldwide have been seeking to understand and replicate this non-human technology. But their one glaring blind spot has been the key principle, namely consciousness.
What's he doing?
E.T. is just a movie, of course,
What's happening?
but the little alien's psychokinesis harmonizes with thousands of testimonials of encounters involving the very same psychic manipulation of the physical world.
And we saw two people. They were in tight black suit, and they had big eyes.
60 children at recess had seen these 2 UFOs hover, 2 alien beings come out, and I even remember how one little girl described it to me. She said it was as if they were kind of floating above the grass towards us.
I could see my feet turning up a little, like your feet would if you're lying down. The toes are up higher. And I could see them, and I was lying down, and I could feel that I was maybe a foot above the bed. And I was really interested in that. I thought, wow. and but I could just feel it, and then my body started to move, and it turned slightly, and it went toward the wall.
Certainly what our own psychically gifted individuals are able to accomplish is mere child's play compared to the spectacular performances of UAPs. But the difference is just one of degree, not one of kind. That is, once we grant that gravity itself can be nullified by consciousness, the entire range of motion and maneuverability then becomes possible, following logically from even the most modest of successes.